All right, so, all right, I think we're online. So, we're good. Good evening, everybody. Very nice to be here, and thank you all for coming on a day when there is a party going on at Loquard, I know, and I think Joe deliberately did this, right? It was we were going to talk about internationalization, while everybody was thinking about localization there. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. Very happy to be at IMUG again. And Joe, thank you for the invitation. And Manish, thank you for the gracious introductions. Very happy to have Manish here. He's like one of my gurus. He's been one of the leaders in internationalization for a long time. And I've learned a lot of things, that he has actually put together and implemented at Google, as well as in internationalization at large. And it's really nice to see you all here to talk about multilingual tweets. It's a very interesting topic, and we were kind of torn between a couple of areas where we wanted to talk about, but we decided to focus in on talking about tweets and how we look at and handle multilingual tweets, especially because at the end of the day, Twitter has literally hundreds of languages which are being used on the platform, but it's incredible the diversity and understanding those tweets and how we actually write software that we can interpret those with. So James, who is my fellow teammate and engineer on my team, he will be digging deeper into the internals of Twitter text through the talk. I will, again, would like to request you guys to ask questions through the talk, and also happy to answer any questions later. So we fundamentally want to talk about, how we handle different languages and tweets, right? And there are two sides to that. Of course, from an internationalization perspective, understanding the diversity in tweets and how do we actually understand the different parts in a tweet. As you can see here, I have 3 examples of tweets. Again, this is just a very small snapshot of the kind of diversity we see in languages on tweets, and especially in terms of mixed languages, right? So as you will see here, the first tweet, on the left-hand side is in Hindi, along with, you can see there are mixed hashtags in English, as well as URLs, as well as the mentions of usernames in English, right? And so you can see that in the world where we are still in the process of supporting, domain names in other languages or usernames in different languages, there is still a huge amount of mixed language content on the web, Twitter especially, where you can see that many times there are multiple languages even in 140 characters. Right? And it's amazing what people do with 140 characters, even when they're using and switching across multiple languages. So in Indic languages, especially Indian languages, you can see that most people who are tweeting in Indian languages are actually using multiple languages all the time. It is a very, very mixed language environment where people interchangeably use English along with, other major Indian languages to be able to tweet. So you can see here that the numbers are in, again, Roman numerals, but that is Hindu-Arabic numerals. But on the same hand, that you could also see tweets where people are actually using native Hindi numerals, for example. So in this case, you can see that people have used images, hashtags, usernames, links. There are so many different parts. Similarly, in the next tweet, you'll see that this is in Malayalam, another language, a very large language in India, and people have used Malayalam and with an English URL. And you can also see there are some rendering issues, which are internationalization issues, where you are not, again, the right font was not used, or it did not render correctly and perfectly on the browser that was this was being rendered in. So the third tweet, these are just examples again, where you can see this is from Persian, from Farsi, and this is a right to left tweet where you're seeing hashtags in Farsi, you're seeing URL in English, you're seeing a text in Farsi, and again there are tweets even far more complex than this, where there's English interspersed in that. So having a BiDi RTL handling along with left to right languages is something that even in 140 characters becomes very interesting as use cases to handle and display correctly. So having said that, I'd like to kind of introduce you to what a tweet actually is composed of. Believe it or not, even in 140 characters, there are so many different parts of that tweet, right? And as you can see here, this is again an example where I'd like to kind of go through the different parts of a tweet. You can see that there is the name that you always see on the left-hand side, and then, of course, the @username. You have the time that shows up here, which is the duration since when it was tweeted. You have an avatar, which is on the left-hand side, which can be your photo that you can upload, or anything else that you would like to have it be. Many people use anime GIFs. It can be anything else that you like. And then there is, of course, the tweet text, right? And you can see here, this is username. Somebody is talking to Alex Ritter, who is one of he's our SVP. But you have the tweet text, then you have the cards, right? You can always see that there are cards that are used often in Twitter, images or embedded media, which is in there. And then you have, of course, on the bottom, interaction components like the reply, share, like. You can see the count on the side, follow for following, you're looking at the tweet from, and of course conversations that stream down below that, right? So you can see that there's a lot of different components in this whole tweet, and different components again have different actions and different functions that are associated with it. So even in 140 characters, there's just amazing amount of diversity in the way people are interacting and sharing and using information and being able to consume and create information. Now, what we are going to do today is we're going to focus in on the tweet text, if you will, and how we process that. And we have a very cool library, which is called Twitter Text, which is an open source library, believe it or not, and it's one of the libraries we use internally ourselves. And you can go and look it up on GitHub, follow it, and also contribute to it. So what this library does is parses tweet text, right? And actually takes and segments it for different languages and is able to handle different tweet entities, different entities within that tweet, right? So that's at mentions, usernames, hashtags with the hash symbol, and the hashtags, as you know, on Twitter are also used for search. So they are topics usually that people are trying to define on the tweet, and it also helps in terms of classifying some of the search topics that exist. And then you have URLs that you saw, in different languages. People use URLs all the time. This library is also very interesting. It actually defines the 140 character limit. So it's again, one of the components that are core to Twitter. It is an open source library. So again, we'll walk through some of that. And then, of course, we also, as I mentioned earlier, handle the Unicode, all the complexities of being able to understand the encodings in Unicode for different languages, and the special, characters for different natural languages, which are defined in the Unicode standards through Twitter text. Twitter text is also used directly and indirectly by several Twitter clients, across the Twitter infrastructure, as well as is available as an API, which you can use also if you are doing something with Twitter Firehose APIs, or just the data itself. And also is used primarily and mainly across a large developer community that we have across Twitter's APIs. The GitHub repos and packages in Maven, Artifactory, Ruby Gems, Bower, NPM, CocoaPods, they're all owned by and maintained by James. So he's one of the core maintainers of the library today. Again, different folks have contributed to this library over time, and I will switch it over to him to actually do a deep dive, and then we'll come back again for questions and more details.
Cool. So I'll be talking about 3 entities that Twitter text defines: usernames, hashtags, URLs. The simplest one is usernames. They are easy to share. They're just up to 20 characters. And you can see that the username can start with either a regular @ or a full width @. It wasn't always like that, but a lot of international users started using the full width @, so we had to add support in order to support that. And that's the way Twitter text has been frequently. It's that users start doing something, and then Twitter text starts supporting that new behavior. So moving on to something a little bit more interesting. Hashtags are a lot more complex. So hashtags can be the full 140 characters. I guess if you're DMing, it can go well beyond 140 characters because DMs don't have a character limit. Hashtags were actually rewritten this year. The logic was rewritten by another engineer on our team. And the logic was made to account for like Unicode code ranges that can be defined in regexes. So Twitter text, I won't go too much into regexes. I don't think everyone's familiar, but basically it starts with either a full width hash symbol or a regular ASCII hash symbol. And then it has to have at least one letter in it, and the rest can be numbers. So you can't have a hashtag that's only numbers. So that's what that means. And by letter, by alpha, I mean that it can be any sort of letter or mark as defined by the Unicode regex definition of \PL\PM. So the L is for letter and the M is for marks. Marks are like accents, like middle dot in Portuguese, and there's tons and tons of these characters. So originally, like last year, Twitter text was supporting just a few character ranges, and it wasn't using these nice Unicode regex definitions. So this is a lot more extendable, and it's going to grow as Unicode grows. Also, the number part is using the Unicode definition of an integer. And so there's no decimal value, there's no negative sign, and so forth. But there are a lot of integers in different scripts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, when you think about them, you think about these symbols, like, in traditional like English numbers. But you can also have numbers that are written in like traditional Chinese, and they do not look like what you're more familiar with. So I think there's like 30 different scripts that define numbers, and Twitter text supports all of those through this Unicode definition of a number. URLs. URLs are extremely complicated in Twitter text, and that's probably the next piece of refactoring that I need to do. We have 228 lines of regexes to define URLs, and basically it's that complicated, for one, because in Japanese, Korean, Chinese, you don't necessarily have a space character between the start of the URL and what came before it, and between the end of the URL and what came after it. So the URL can actually be embedded right in the text with no sort of delimiter on either side. The delimiter is context. So Twitter text has a ton of regexes in order to be smart about this context, so people can use URLs fluidly in their native language. Twitter text also, let's see, let me just go over these little examples here. So at the top, the title of the slide is URL dot and then 2 characters that kanji. So here we have a hashtag, twitter.com/hashtag 2 kanji characters. That URL works. You also have twitter.com/ and then the what's it called, the URL encoding? Yeah, so the URL encoding of these same kanji. You can see that these kanji are each 3 bytes, I guess. So that's another way of, posting the same URL. A third way, so this internationalized domain up here, this is a valid domain. You can also use this syntax for the same domain. So there's various ways of posting the same sort of link that goes to the same location. And different browsers have different support for each one of these examples. We pull all of our domains. So the domain is the part that comes after the dot on a URL, like .com, .net. There are 40 pages of domains right now if you go to this link, and it's growing very rapidly. So there are domains added for various languages. There's domains like, is .google a domain yet? There's all kinds of domains. And Twitter text just syncs with IANA to get the most up-to-date list of domains. And that's what we support as far as domains go. Tweet examples. Yeah.
So go through some of the tweet examples just to kind of highlight some of the characters that are being used. This is Greek. You can see that some of the accents that are being rendered for the characters actually go through Twitter text to be able to, again, interpret the different accents and special characters in the script. As well as you can see that there are hashtags here where, these are interpreted and understood. So again, for each language, and I have 3 examples here, you can see that this is Hindi, for example, where you are seeing that there is an Hindi hashtag here. This is a famous cricket player. And there is all the special matras that are there in Hindi, which are getting interpreted and understood. So Twitter text actually handles this for all the languages that we support, and actually understanding and deciphering each of these and how that can be searched, right? So it makes it search-enabled as you go through and understand that.
Question?
Yes.
So do you actually have a good model around being able to do suggestion off these other language texts? Is it using the translate.twitter stuff to suggest what? Do you translate it before you put it in the suggested algorithm, or do you just use suggestions in different language sets?
This is all user-generated content. This is not translated by us at all. This is actually all user-generated content, and what Twitter text does is to understand.
Right, but I'm saying then when Twitter does recommendations in English, does it do this for the translations?
No, yes, it does. You have content translation for tweet translation enabled on Twitter. If you have looked at the small globe that is next to each tweet, and we use Bing Translate today as our machine translation suggester, where suggestions are made for and target language where the person wants to see a specific tweet in that language, and it goes usually through the Bing.
Yeah, but I'm asking about the recommendations off that. Does this enter the recommendation engine you use when it recommends other tweets you should see? When you share a tweet.
So what happens is that like the hashtag that exists here, right? It will use our search functionality will use that as the and find the related suggestions according.
Oh, okay, off the hashtag. That's where it is. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Thanks.
So this is another example, and this is in Japanese, where you can see again that there are hashtags in Japanese where special characters are being handled, and then you have a URL in English, and this is a Pikachu tweet. So again, the hashtag is a Pikachu tweet, but again, for each language, And each language family, again, Twitter text is the library where, you know, we go through it and actually recognize each one of these components in the tweet. So again, these are different languages, and again, they are good examples of some of the diversity. Again, there are also a lot more complex tweets that show up sometimes, depending on the type of languages that are being used and the media or the context that they're being used in. Sometimes, you know, if you even look at tweets which are used for stock trading, you will see symbols, you know, currency trading, you'll see, and all these special symbols that are used in tweets are also actually handled by the same library. So if any of you are engineers, developers, please take a look at this library. It's very interesting. And, you know, if you can use it, that's cool. Also, please feel free to give us suggestions. We have a backlog of different requests. So I'll switch it over to James for, you know, kind of deep diving into some of the areas which are not covered by Twitter text, and then we'll come back.
So in that backlog of issues for Twitter text, we get a lot of requests that are outside of Twitter text responsibility. So there's logic that exists in other Twitter services and other Twitter libraries, and I'll just talk about a few of those so you don't end up reporting the wrong bugs, and just so you're familiar with like what's in Twitter text itself by knowing what's not in it. So Twitter text does not involve, if you use Twitter via SMS, it does not interpret the SMS commands. So when you send a tweet to the special phone number 40404, that's Twitter's like short phone number for the US and for other countries. You might send a text to that phone number that's DM, Jackal me, and then the text of the tweet. So Twitter text does not identify that DM command. That is a separate library. Mm-hmm. Twitter text would just do parsing of testing SMS DMs, exclamation point. So that's what Twitter text would be given. Twitter text does not do any metadata. There's location metadata. There's tagging faces and images with, you know, people. There's like the t.co short links. There's metadata for what that link actually redirects to. Twitter does not do anything with metadata. It just does the tweet itself, the tweet content itself. Twitter text also does not link IP addresses. I think it might be for security reasons. But if you tweet a URL that's, you know, has a IP address as the domain, then it's not going to be linked. So Twitter text won't do that. Fine. So we do have requested features that are quite valid. Twitter text is not well documented. Lots of people ask for better documentation, and that's something that the community could certainly provide. It's something that I'd like to work a lot more on too, but we're very busy. Twitter text also would like to identify email addresses in tweets. So right now it just identifies URLs. It'd be kind of cool if you could do a mail to link. Twitter text also, oh, it's not rendering. So this PDF viewer doesn't support emoji and URLs either. But that was like a little cat face. And Twitter text would love to support emoji and URL paths. Yeah.
So I mean, we're working on that in a different library, but again, emoji is hugely used by our users in tweets, and
Adobe needs to work on that too.
Yes.
Let's see. Also, people request different implementations of Twitter text. We have a Java, JavaScript, Ruby, and Objective-C implementation internal to Twitter. There's a rough Python implementation that exists out there. Could use a lot of help. And we do have requests for PHP implementations, probably because of Facebook. Facebook uses PHP. And yeah, so we would love more implementations of Twitter text. Twitter text has a conformance suite that you can test your library against. And as long as you're passing all of the conformance tests, then you have a Twitter text implementation. So the release cycle for Twitter text. It's usually just on demand for internal needs. So we really need that full width @ sign because, you know, people are using it to @ mention people. That would be like an on-demand internal need. We'd like to, we're like recently sort of going to a once every other month release. And the reason it's not more frequent is because it's used by lots of services internally, and we have to restart all of those services. We have to re-release all the Twitter clients, TweetDeck, Android, iOS. Like, it takes a lot of work to release Twitter text. So it takes like a significant chunk of time in order to manage all that and do it like cohesively so that some clients and services aren't behind.
Yeah.
We also push packages, as Alita said earlier, to Maven for JVM, Ruby Gems for Rails and so forth, NPM and Bower for JavaScript backend and front end, and Cocoa Pods for like iPhone development. Let's see, yeah, and also after deploying, I have to like be on call for any issues that come up. So once my CTags file was in my like Twitter text development environment, and if you use Vim, you're familiar with CTags as a way of like linking between different code files. That can get quite big if you have a large code base. And so I accidentally pushed a 500 megabyte CTags file to NPM, and people were really not very happy about that, and it broke a lot of things. So that's one thing that I would be on call for during a Twitter text deploy. Yeah, so how you can contribute. You can fork and clone the Twitter text repo on GitHub. You'll want to create a feature branch, just regular development procedure. As soon as you push your branch and create a pull request, then Travis CI is going to run all the tests. So you don't have to worry about running tests locally on your laptop. Travis CI will do that for you. Then you can finish development in each of JavaScript, Java, Ruby, Objective-C, because those are supported first party by Twitter. And Travis CI will be succeeding once each of those languages is passing the conformance tests that you added for your new feature. And then once those tests are passing, you may or may not have to ask me to merge it. I'll probably just see it, but maybe I won't. Yeah, so that's about contributing to Twitter text. And
Okay. I mean, again, we can go through this together. But again, because Twitter is very much consumes and uses an open source very heavily across the company on different stacks and different projects, we also contribute to open source enormously and believe that open source really matters. It is something that drives the open web. It is super, super important for us to contribute and to the ecosystem. We have an open source, very active mailing list across the company. We also contribute to several open source projects such as Mesos, Finnicle, Pants, Scalding, a lot of different Java-based as well as other infrastructure projects. And you can always go to these URLs and check out all our repos. We have hundreds of repos, code, that is available on GitHub/Twitter. Constantly, there's a lot of activity and contributions coming in from across the company, different engineers contributing to different libraries. We also contribute very much so and would like to do more in terms of contributing to open source language libraries, because I really think that that's something that until language components are commodities that are available to everybody on the web, we actually cannot grow the language ecosystems at a pace where it's viral, right? That just like people tweet without thinking and just talk about different topics in content, it is equally important for language support to be, fundamentally commoditized and be part of the platforms that we use today, which are the browsers, the mobile OSs, and as well as the language libraries that are used by applications. So again, we consume ICU, CLDR very heavily. We also, some of the core contributors for these libraries are at Google and some of the other large organizations, but we also contribute and use these libraries, especially in Java and Ruby, quite heavily. We also maintain other libraries such as Twitter CLDR, which is a very popular library for the Ruby world, where many third-party organizations use Twitter CLDR Ruby because of that being the single foremost Ruby implementation, if you will, of consuming CLDR data. And we also have Twitter text, of course, is an example, as well as a very interesting library, which is an NLP library for Korean text extraction, which is also available. You can check out. These are, again, examples. There are more libraries. Also, in the world of emoji, as I was mentioning earlier, Emoji is something that is, again, has been codified in Unicode, in the Unicode standard, and continues to grow in the standards world in terms of the scalability and the number of characters that are getting supported in the platforms, but also in the user-generated content where, like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or any of the other applications that we use every day online. Weibo is another very good example, or Line for that matter, where you see a huge amount of emoji being embedded and used and consumed by people all the time. So as we started looking and kind of realizing and seeing that people were starting to use a lot of emoji 2013 onwards, like there's a lot of tweets that have emoji that was coming in. And last year, we released an open library of emoji icons, again, customized based on the Unicode standard code points that are available, but, again, nicer, friendlier, more Twittery renditions of them. And we continue to add more to that library as we see that. We're also doing a fair bit of work in recognizing and basically identifying emoji within tweet streams, right? As people are using more and more emoji. You can go and check out our Twitter emoji library at our GitHub URL. And again, this is just a highlight of some of the work that we are doing around this, and we continue to actually contribute pretty heavily in open source. There is again, 2 shout outs for my team. So again, I'm hiring, so I'm looking for great engineers in internationalization. If you're interested, please ping me. And also like to take questions.
True.
Yeah, it seems interesting that you haven't used metadata and location, especially for internationalization. That'd be a good way to get excellent context, and maybe even tie in a recommendation for like accounts to follow, because you could hit score the text.
So I think location metadata on Twitter is opt-in, I believe, and if you turn that on, Twitter definitely will save that metadata and it will use it to improve your experience. It's just that Twitter text does not parse your location. It does not parse your metadata. That's other Twitter libraries outside Twitter text.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you want to make actual ones in translation, like if you want to make it a better thing, even something maybe the partnership with Google and data would be interesting about that. Because I know for language stuff, we had a problem with this with the Haiti earthquake. We had to use Samasource and what was it? We used Ushahidi, and literally we had to translate it using Samasource, and people spoke the patois, and we helped the central command with GRSS and other metadata to find where to dig people out. So I know it's a useful screen. We can figure out who was okay. We rolled it back before time and location. So I happen to know it actually is pretty useful in things like that, and other things like recommending accounts to follow and ranking what hashtag posts people should look at in the timeline.
Yeah.
All right, so what else do you want to do with the corpus of data you have here once they open up the OpenJDK VM? What do you want? Where's your roadmap and vision if you could just get resources, open source or otherwise, thrown at it? Where'd you go with it?
Well, I mean, we have a lot of projects looking at our data and analyzing it in different languages, and really, again, looking at relationships, understanding the tweets better in terms of the interconnections in topics, as well as understanding the relationships between people who are interested in specific topics. So those are 2 direct areas that have huge impact in each of the networks, if you will, of, it's like, think of it as an interest graph, if that's a general way of putting it, where in each language, you have different dimensions of interest graphs around the people who are actually users and actively tweeting, also in the languages that they are tweeting in, and also the topical classifications that are being used and form the third dimension, if you will, in those interest networks. Sure. I mean, again, we do a fair, again, there are several internal projects that we are working on. I hope that answers some of your question. Okay.
So I wonder if you offer different levels of support for different languages, and if you do, could you give some kind of indication of what numbers of languages you support at different levels? And then the follow-on question is, if there's a language you don't support today, how would it get onto your radar, and what would it take in terms of engineering to get it into the lowest level of support?
It depends on what you mean by support. Can you be?
That's what I'm asking you. Do you offer different levels of support? Like for English, French, and Chinese, you support all 20 major features, and for some other languages, it's only 10. I'm not really sure what that question means. Do you distinguish in terms of the level of facility that you provide to different languages?
Yeah, so there are a set of core languages that are used for like 99% of internet traffic, and those languages are definitely supported across all of Twitter's products and features. And then there are what we call long-tail languages. They're in that 1%, and they're just a fraction of that last 1% of internet traffic. And some of those languages we support, some we don't. I'm actively learning Esperanto, and I'd like to see Twitter have Esperanto translations for the UI. Or Klingon, we released lolcat for the UI during like April Fools a couple years ago, so Klingon would be kind of fun. Be a good one, But all of the Twitter UI is translated by Twitter users. We have a platform where Twitter users volunteer to translate Twitter's Chrome, the UI. And that site is called translate.twitter.com, and I'm the most senior engineer who works on that site. I've been there the longest among the engineers who work on the site. Yang over here also works on the site with me, and it's really fun to run. The translators are super engaged. They're super proud of Twitter. We've had languages like Catalan that we weren't sure if we wanted to support, but the users came and they were just so excited. There were so many of them that we just had to enable it on the site. And now twitter.com is translated to Catalan, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer to your question would be, how do you get a user, how do you get a language supported in Twitter's universe? And that would be by popular user usage, actually.
And is there some forum where these people know to go to get your attention, or?
Yeah, I mean, again, yes, there are.
Yeah. So if you go to the drop-down box on twitter.com, there's a button that says translate. If you click on that, it gives you a list of languages to translate into. If you don't see the language you want in that list, you can request a language. There's a button for request a new language. And every once in a while, we look at those languages. We look at how many requests there are. We talk with users who would be power translators in that space, and we ask them if they'd be willing to be moderators of their community. So they're not Twitter employees, but they're directly connected to what we call language shepherds at Twitter. And those language shepherds speak with these community moderators who manage the translation of twitter.com, of Vine, of Periscope, of Android, of iOS. There's tons of Twitter features and products that get translated. And those moderators are responsible for translating those features and products to their language using their volunteer language community.
He's being nice. He's not asking his next question.
Oh, yes. Now, he would ask a lot of questions. We could easily walk you through the regexes if you want on Twitter text.
It would be helpful to put the list of library links back up while you're taking questions. Over here. Okay, hang on.
This one?
There we go. Thank you.
Sorry, I walked in a little late, so apologize if you already answered this, but in Twitter text, do you have to declare the language you're processing, or is just a universal input gets something out?
Yeah, so Twitter text is sort of language independent because it uses these Unicode definitions for like really broad character classes. But when tweets come in, they go through a language identification process. Yeah. That process is done by the NLP team at Twitter, and they've done a good job of identifying which language each tweet is in, and then that language is used for Bing Translate recommendations.
So we do have a language ID, identification process.
Okay, but it's not needed for the segmentation and the analysis that's being done.
It's not needed for Twitter text.
Okay.
Yeah, Twitter text allows you to tweet in multiple languages. You could use 140 different languages in your tweet. Twitter text would be fine with that.
You should try it.
Second question is how popular is the feature to translate tweets? Like, is it a very common?
I believe it's quite popular.
Very popular.
Yeah.
The feature to translate tweets is actually extremely popular. In fact, we on a regular basis surpass, our expectations.
So my question is, if a person is talented in their own language, and then a little bit computational knowledge, so you guys give any training and provide take as interns or like fresh graduates or something, or just we have to be like,
So again, engineering as well as other groups at Twitter all have internship programs with where on an annual basis there are literally thousands of applications, and there is an internship recruitment program for again, every team has interns every year. We do not do any kind of formal training for anybody in the sense that again, we are focused on engineering. So,
yes, I saw that actually. That's amazing.
So it really is that in a world of language engineering and localization, internationalization, where you have really an amazing blend of both science, engineering, as well as linguistics, combining in. Usually, again, at Google, Twitter, Facebook, it really requires that level of experience, if you will, coming into that. But having said that, again, it's super important to understand that we have a very large volunteer contributor community. And if you really want to get involved in terms of leveraging your language skills and being able to contribute, I would suggest that please do contribute as a volunteer initially and get involved in contributing in the community and the languages you're good at for localization, and then get more involved as you are more familiar with many of our platforms as well as software.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask my second question, then I'll be quiet. I'm interested in the enabling language options that are associated with hashtags. So, as I'm sure you well know, there are many words in many languages that are identical, so nation and nación, that kind of thing. As far as I know, there's no way of saying that this particular tag is an English tag or a French tag or an Italian tag. That's kind of, is that a problem when people use the same tag in different language contexts? Then the related question to that is, in the context of translation, when you're translating the tweet, do you make any kind of an attempt to translate a tag that is associated with a particular concept, say in English, to an equivalent tag that's associated with the same content or idea in the target language? Have you given any thought to that?
Yes, we've given a lot of thought to that, and we are thinking about it. But we do not. So we do have a sophisticated language ID, identification process, right, and a selection algorithm. And we do use that pretty heavily for identifying the language of the tweet as such. Now,
and hashtag as well.
Included, yes. And but that doesn't mean that it's perfect, because in mixed language environments, especially in mixed language tweets, where you have closely related languages that are being used, and many times that's the case because, if you're tweeting in Portuguese, you might also be using, related languages, if you will, in the text itself. The majority language is what we will, usually gets picked up as the language which is identified. And again, there are so many use cases, especially in user-generated content, where it's like, at what point do you say this is the majority language versus this is the minority set of languages, and do you care about the other languages in that tweet to be able to better recommend, right? It becomes very complex very quickly, even in 140 characters. So the short answer again is that we do use language ID to be able to recognize the language of a hashtag. Again, we're working on looking at more sophisticated implementations and understanding of multilingual tweets.
Okay, so let's assume that you have identified correctly the language that you should apply to a particular hashtag, and you're translating the whole tweet now into another language. Do you have any mechanism at all for identifying or seeing if there is an equivalent hashtag in the target language? Traffic goes to Trafico or whatever, so that you could use that as a basis, or you stick to the source language, and if they're interested in seeing related tweets, they have to go back to the source language and see the translations again?
Yeah, so hashtags can have multiple languages in them. You can tweet a hashtag that's 1/3 French, 1/3 Korean, 1/3 German, whatever, and the hashtag could also be ASCII art. And so you can't, hashtags can be anything. So, hashtags are not translated, and we don't identify the language of individual hashtags. We only identify the language at a tweet level.
Yeah, the main reason actually is because when we send our tweets to Bing Translator, we will strip out all the hashtag and the username. That's the main reason why we don't have this functionality yet. But that's a very good point, and maybe we can work on it.
Yep. Yeah, you want to come up here?
Oh, by the way, I'm Yang. I'm also from International Engineering. I work with Elevita and James.
Okay. We're happy to make it.
I haven't done anything about Twitter text. I'm not so confident to talk about that. But we are closely working on the Twitter Translation Center. We have spent a lot of work on that.
So, how multilingual are the translations? In other words, with a given tweet, how many languages could that be translated into? Say somebody is reading in Arabic, a tweet in Arabic, could they translate it into Portuguese and into English? How many languages?
So the way tweet translation works is it's sent to Bing, so whatever languages Bing supports, Twitter supports, and also the tweet is translated from the tweet language to your language as you define it in your Twitter profile settings. So if your Twitter profile is set to French, then all of the English tweets will have an option to translate to French, and then you would have to change your profile language in order to get a different translation.
So it's one-to-one usually. That is, depending on what the source language is and what. It's not going to give you 15 languages for translations.
And there was also a story here, actually. I worked 3 months ago, because sometimes when we do language identification, our algorithm is different from Bing's algorithm. So for some tweets, maybe we identify it as Vietnamese, but Bing identify as some Indonesian. Yes, sometimes it's different. Then because when we send our tweets to Bing Translator, we have to specify which language from where to where. Then sometimes it gets incorrect result. and then the end user will see, sorry, we cannot translate these tweets. That's really bad. Makes us look bad and also makes Bing look bad. Then in those kind of situations, actually what we are doing is kind of hack around. So basically, currently we are doing is whenever it's different, the first time, the first user will see that we cannot translate it. And then further on, we will catch that result. And we will just entirely hide the translate button. So basically, we are hide from this problem for now.
No, actually, the thing is that, it's again a quality of service issue, right? Because again, at the end of the day, user-generated content is so diverse, right? And the number of languages that are getting used on platforms like Twitter are just hundreds of languages. So when you're dependent on MT for providing suggestions, you really will get high-quality translations only for high-quality translations beyond that. So language detection and language identification is super important, and that's our first line of defense, if you will, right? Because if we can, so what we do is we actually use our own language detection algorithms. We do not use Google's language ID or Microsoft's language ID libraries, because again, in the Twitter world and in the tweet world, we understand our content better, so it enables us to at least recognize languages more specifically and more accurately.
It's a very different NLP problem when you're dealing with 140 characters.
Yes.
Most NLP libraries deal with newspaper articles, like paragraphs of text. So 140 characters is a very different algorithm.
Yeah. So, yes.
Also, my question to the number. What happens to number of the characters when a tweet is translated? I mean, obviously, the characters will change.
Yes. So the translation is shown as is from Bing. We know that when we see Japanese tweets that use the full 140 characters, it's generally 2 paragraphs of English text. So.
So you will display all 2 paragraphs.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, for the translation. However, you cannot tweet.
Yes, exactly.
Whoops. Earlier you mentioned that you accept single and double width forms of characters, and my question is, do you normalize to a single form? Is that what you store? When you do that, if you do you preserve the original form, and is there an API to retrieve that if you have a reason to?
So some things are normalized in Unicode. If you want to accent the letter A, you can either tweet an accented A, which is a single code point, or you can tweet 3 code points, the A, a joiner, and an accent. And so we do normalize that down to just 1 code point to save space, to simplify. That's what's normalized. Beyond that, I don't think anything has changed. And you cannot get the original version after we collapse those joiners with accents.
Hashtags in bidirectional languages, especially in a tweet with mixed languages. I think that was solved a while ago, but do you know the story of how that was handled?
What was the question?
Hashtags in bidirectional languages. I mean, how do you know this is the hashtag and which side the hash mark is on when they've also got some Latin text in there that goes the other way?
Yeah, so in this tweet example in the upper right, we see that it's in Persian, but the URL is in English. There are Persian URLs, but this user chose to tweet their URL in English. You can see that the hashtags are on the other side because it's RTL. And we do support mixed RTL, LTR text. I believe our support is as smart as like if more than half of the characters are RTL characters, then we will render it as RTL.
It's again identifying the majority language and applying the rules for that.
It's not fair.
Yes, I agree.
I'm not sure if it's the expertise of the. Can you tell something about the social networks stuff that you mentioned that you're interested in the net?
What we do is we try to understand the networks of users in different languages for different topics, right? And that's, again, just to understand what the relationships are, where we can actually offer better suggestions for others, followers you may follow, or other content and topics that you may be interested in.
So earlier I mentioned that Twitter's Catalan community really wanted a Catalan UI translation. Is that what you're referring to? Okay, sure.
Okay. Two things. NLP, what's your AI or machine learning model around optimizing NLP to get better recommendation? Are you doing something like they do with semantic stuff like you do with actually
Sure. So we are from Twitter's translation team. We have a separate NLP team. Those engineers aren't here, although I invited them, but they do a lot of custom NLP support. They look at the results for every single language. They do a lot of tweaking of their algorithms, and I know a lot goes into that. So
yeah, because that's a obvious area. Oh,
it's a different talk. Come to the Unicode conference.
Okay.
We'll be talking about it there.
Can I ask, what level of this stuff would you be making available for partners? I know Google does some stuff with you, and others do. What type of stuff like that are you making it available for people to contribute to?
I think that much of our content is available through our APIs. Right? Now, are you talking about the
I'm thinking of
interest graphs created based with NLP? Is that what you're talking about? Recommendation tools? Are you asking whether we would make a recommendation?
No, I'm thinking of writing something to do that. Yeah. So.
In the data?
Yeah, the data. I would use it to do that, and I would use NLP on my own side as an app, hopefully.
The data is available through our APIs.
But sometimes, other leadership, they would cut off apps that did interesting things. We wouldn't violate terms of service, but that would be something I'm looking for, granular ability to find the tweets that you want. So that's why I asked.
Offline, you can find out more about your use case.
Let me know, or ask. Otherwise, I ask for 835, which sucks.
Yeah, that's true. It is tough.
I'm pretty sure you're just Magneto at this point.
What else you got?
Other questions?
Is there a place, are you going to put this slide online, or is there a place where we can find all these links? I know we can go to GitHub. Okay, thanks. Because I tried to take a picture and it wasn't working. So.
Sorry about the small font.
It's the white on blue. Yeah, but there's a lot of links because you got a lot of stuff going on. So this is good. My phone sees and hears everything better than me.
Yes, but these slides will be available. I'll just give them to you.
Cool. So anything else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was